Today we're going to be doing faceting. Faceting is where you subtract clay off of the walls so you give a more angular, harder effect to the side of the pot. It can be a bit dodgy because when you're cutting off you can go through the side of the pot, so it can take a little bit of trial and error, and if you're going to belly the pot out after you've faceted the side of the walls, then you can still easily tear through. So you've got to really try and throw thick to begin with before you start subtracting the clay. I've got two types of clay that I've mixed together, so it's going to give a nice marbled effect when you facet through the walls. You can do it just with one straight clay type, but doing it with two clays mixed together gives a really nice strata effect to the clay. I'm using two stoneware clays. I've got white earthstone and a toasted clay, so it's going to give a kind of brown and white effect. If you are going to use two clay bodies together, make sure that you wedge them both thoroughly independently, and it's a very similar kind of state when you put them together on the wheel. Otherwise, when you start to pull up, you're going to find that one is resisting and one might be easier to pull with, and it's going to push your pot off centre a lot easier. So you want to make sure that they're kind of at the same state. One good thing to do is to wedge up your two pieces of clay and put them in a bag overnight. And if you leave them for a while, then the clays begin to homogenise together and they end up in the same kind of state. Then I've just given them a little wedge before I've put them back onto the wheel head. So as usual, when you start, I'm going to cone up and centre down, have the wheel head going as fast as possible, drizzle on some water. And I've got about, I think somewhere between 1.5 to 2 kilos. So plenty of water when you cone up. Centering down. Remember to get right on top of your clay when you're centering. And if you feel that there's still a twist in it, I can feel there's a little twist in here. I can see it moving up and down when I centre down. Then you might want to cone up and down. It's quite a good idea to cone up and down maybe 3 times before you actually start. If you think your clay isn't perfectly centered, and especially if you're using two different types of clay, it can really help, because if they're slightly different states, then it can just be a little off-putting. And tidy up my wheel head, take away the excess at the bottom. Let's give it one last little centre. So now all I'm going to do is create a thick-walled cylinder. So I'm going to bring it up like I normally would do, but I'm not going to refine the walls and make them reasonably thin. Normally you're going for somewhere about like less than 0.5 centimetre, something like that. This I'm going to keep them reasonably chunky, maybe over 1 centimetre, 1.5 centimetres, so that when you do facet off the side of the walls, you have less chance of going through, or if, when you're bellying out, it doesn't split. I'm going to show how to do 3 different types of facet. So, hole in the middle. You're going down to about 1 centimetre on the bottom. Drawing out. Consolidate on the base, so you reduce S cracks and cracking later on. Collar in, so you want the walls going in the way to begin with, and then I'm going to start to draw up. So pinching from the very bottom, starting to draw the walls up. Consolidate and level off at the top, and then collar in again. And if you're having problems trying to drag that clay up, it might be useful to give yourself just a little undercut at the bottom. That way you can get a bit of purchase underneath there, so you can really pinch your fingers in. Slow your wheel down when you're drawing up. Remember to get your wheel going a bit faster when you're collaring in. Just going to try and get a bit more weight from the bottom up. And there you can see that marbling effect where I'm using the two clays, and that will look really nice when we take the facets off. Oops. So I'm going to start to facet now. I've left the walls about 1 centimetre thick at the top. What you can do is you can start from the bottom and come all the way out at the top of the piece, but I tend to only facet up to about here, so I give myself a little bit at the top, so I'm pressing in with my finger just to make a mark, as I'm going to only facet up to here, because if you facet all the way up to the top it can split on the very rim, and when it begins to split on the rim it can begin to follow and kind of fissure all the way down to the bottom. So, and also it gives a nice finish to the top of the pot as well. It looks more, yeah, it just looks more finished and considered. So I'm just going to collar that in ever so slightly. This has got a real wobble on it. That's because I've used the two different clays. So I'm going to show you how to facet with a harp and also with a wire as well. When you're faceting, the useful thing about using a harp is it's under tension, so it's really taut, because when you draw up the walls you want it to be as taut as possible. If your wire begins to move at all, then that's when it starts cutting in and you get different depths going up the side of the wall, and that's when it can begin to split and rip through at the side. So I'm going to give myself a mark at the bottom to facet into as well. And I'm going to cut in and draw up the side of the pot. So I'm sticking the harp in just a few millimeters and then drawing it up the side of the pot really carefully till you come out at the top part and then peel away. And that's the section you've peeled off, and you're left with those lovely strata that come out the side of the pot. That's a really nice thing about using two different clays. It is a bit trickier to work with two different clays, but you get a really nice effect. If you are going to be faceting, what you don't want to do is start faceting here, then do the next facet, because what can happen is you end up with a big gap. They're not evenly spaced. So I've done one facet here, turn your wheel 180 degrees, and then do your second facet directly opposite that one. You'll find it's just easier to work out the placement of your facets. And you can work out however many you want, but ideally you'll have an even number, either 6, 8, more depending on the size of your pot, the size of your wire, and how thick you've left your walls. So that's a straight facet with a harp. I'm going to show you how to use a wiggly wire and the different effect that gives you. So this is just a normal cutting wire, but it's got a twist in it, so it gives a really lovely effect. If you haven't got a proper wiggly wire, what you can do is get a spring and pull a spring out, and it's just exactly the same thing. So I'm going to turn the pot 90 degrees this time, so the two facets I originally did are now on the opposite sides here and here. Holding the wire taut, put it in, and I'm just going to drag it straight up as I did with the harp, and you're keeping that wire under tension and pull it away from you. And you'll see when I turn it round, it just gives a kind of corrugated effect, slightly different effect. And again, directly opposite that one, turn the pot 180 degrees. And pulling away. The reason I start at the bottom and work up the way is because I find when I pull up and go up, I can pull away at the top, and the facet of clay that I've cut falls away quite easily. If I start at the top and drag down the way, the facet can then drag down the side of the pot, and especially if you're mixing two clays, it can run down and rub, and it can just smear all the really lovely clay that you've exposed. So now I'm going to do one more type of facet, which is a bit like a herringbone. So I'm going to use a wiggly wire again, and I'm going to do a soaring motion going up. Yeah, so do it this way so you can see, and I'm going to be soaring up as if it's you're soaring something. This is a little bit trickier, so I'd advise those of you who've never done this before to stick to the straight facets to begin with, or just using the wiggly wire straight up. This takes a little bit more practice, as this is when you can lose the tension, or you can just go through the side of your pot. And peel that away, and you end up with a kind of very textured kind of profile on the side of your piece. I'll do another one opposite that one, so it's this one here. Put the wire in and saw back and forth, keeping it under tension. And your pot will move around a bit, but don't worry too much. It may not be the most perfectly on centre pot. It does get moved a little bit, but you can change the top. You can kind of centre the top again slightly. So I'm going to do two more of those wiggly wire facets. And the last one. When you're doing this, I would take a little bit more time over it. You'll get a better result. Right, so that's all the sides faceted off. These little bits that are left here, you can take those off, either using the harp or the wiggly wire, whatever you want, but it can be quite nice to leave some unexposed areas. It just gives a little bit more interest to the pot. That's just personal taste. When you're going to be working on the pot from now on, the most important thing is not to touch the outside of the pot. If you touch the outside of the pot, then you're going to lose all the really lovely facets you've put in, and also the detail. Also, you don't want to have any water going down the outside of the pot, because dirty water will also smear and smudge all those facets. So you just need to be a little bit more careful as to where you put your water. Little bit on the inside. I'm just going to wet my hands using the slurry that I've made, wetting my hands with that, and I'm just going to try and get this back on centre, because you can see it's gone way off, and you might not get it perfect, but you can try and work with it to get it at least a little bit more circular than it was. Just consolidating it, colouring it in slightly. I'm going to try and pull this up a little bit and pin it back. So if you're wanting to get it perfectly level, then you can use a pin to pin it back. So putting your finger on the inside of the pot, your hands joined, and then you want to press the pin in towards your finger very gently. Take that away, and you're left with a really nice level pot. Just soften that off. You can just leave it at this point the way it is, and it's straight sided, but you can belly the pot out. This can be tricky as well, so only if you're feeling more confident and you think that there is enough space for your walls to stretch slightly. So I'm going to have a go at this one. It's a little bit thin in places, but you want to make sure your hand is nice and wet. You're putting your hand inside the pot. I'm going to steady it by holding it, and when I'm in, my hand's like that, I'm just going to begin to open my hand out, and it should stretch the walls slightly. So the pot's going slowly, and I'm just beginning to open my hands out on the inside, bringing it all the way up, again down to the bottom, pushing out really gently, because you don't want to rip through those walls. Especially if you've used a wiggly wire, you can get very, very thin parts. Take the hand away very gently. I'm just consolidating and levelling off that rim again, so it looks nicely finished. Remember and take away any water that's been left inside, and when you're going inside the pot, always remember to hold your arm steady so it doesn't catch. And I'll just tidy up the bottom of the pot, taking away any excess clay. Now, doing this kind of pot, it's not going to be as perfect as it would be when you're doing a normally thrown pot, just because you're jiggling the pot about with the facets, and also when you're bellying out, you're only using one hand and you're not supporting on the outside. But it gives a really lovely effect, and it's kind of an organic kind of piece. It's going to be a little bit weightier at the bottom, so you're going to have to think about how you're going to turn it off at the bottom. But have a practice with it, and don't be worried if you go through to begin with. Everyone goes through at some point when they're doing faceted pot, especially with the wiggly wires. I can see on this one there's a couple of little points where it's begun to go through, but I'll leave that to go leather hard and fill that from the inside, so it'll be hardly noticeable when the piece has gone through for firing. But wait until it's leather hard to do anything about that, or you'll find your pot will just begin to collapse. I'm going to leave it on the wheel for a little while just to stiffen up before I take it away, just because the walls are really, really thin in parts. I don't want to jar it and make the pot collapse. You could get a hairdryer on it quickly for 5 minutes, but I'll take that off later and then show you the results when it's turned. Thank you. Okay.